Joining us now is our friend Joe Bistardi, chief forecaster at Weather Bell. Hello, Joe.
How you doing, Steve?
How are you? Last time we spoke, sir, it was about a blizzard here in the Northeast and then up in New England. And now we have something that is certainly much more deadly, which strikes with so much more speed and ferocity, and is so hard to get out of the way of if you're not prepared to get out of the way of it. And that, of course, is the tornado that struck yesterday. They're calling it one of the worst, ever. Is that accurate?
Well, it's certainly going to be up there in the top 100. But if you look at the list of the top 10, no, it's not accurate. This country has had tornadoes that have killed well over 100 people. Let's just hope we never see anything like what happened in 1925.
Right, that was 695, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, correct?
Well, at least that.
Yeah.
Some people say over 1,000. I think that of all the events I've ever seen meteorologically, where I look at something and say, how could that possibly have happened? The 1938 hurricane on the eastern seaboard and the 1925 tri-state tornado. I look at those things, and if it wasn't for the actual recorded history, I could not believe something like that would have happened, because for something to be on the ground for 180 miles and have multiple vortexes 2-3 miles wide, it pales in comparison. Now, the death toll with this, and when you talk like this, people think that I'm trying to minimize what happened. I'm not at all. I'm trying to put this in perspective so that the people, the rational people that are listening, understand where we are today. Okay, we have many, many, many more people living in Tornado Alley, just like we have many more people living on the beaches now, okay, than we did in 1950, 1955. That's the first thing. Second thing is, you have more urban sprawl today in the plains. I mean, Oklahoma City, when I was, I guess 7 or 8 years old, we went through Oklahoma City. My dad was a student in Texas A&M. We were going back and forth to New England. Oklahoma City then, what I remember then, and now are two different things. I mean, it's a huge sprawling area, and more is part of that Oklahoma City complex. And so what happens is you look at the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There's several big cities within that Metroplex. So when you're talking about tornadoes now, what used to be something that may just have hit a few areas or be out in the middle of fields in a lot of cases, are now going through areas that are relatively densely populated. What this is showing, though, and this is a real something that people should understand, that the National Weather Service, at NOAA, has done such a fantastic job with upgrading those short-term warnings, where if a person gets 20 to 30 minutes of warning, 10 minutes of warning, as opposed to 1 or 2 minutes, it saves countless lives. Because if you look at the list of the tornado deaths, over 100, Waco, for instance, Lubbock, Shreveport, Louisiana, all these big tornado disasters were occurring back in the 50s and 60s and even back into the 40s. So if you have more people living in harm's way, but less people
right.
are being killed, I mean,
the warning system is much better. Absolutely.
Much better.
Joe, tell people, because thank God I live here in the Northeast, and I've never been involved in a tornado. I mean, occasionally you'll hear about tornado warnings in our area.
Yeah, you might hear about them on Thursday. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some tornadic activity in the east on Thursday, though not to the extent you see out in the plains.
Right. Well, explain to the folks, who aren't familiar. I mean, they have trouble wrapping their arms around this and grasping. They see the pictures. We've been playing some pictures on the screen as you've been talking, and we see the aftermath, the devastation. But it's just hard to explain what a tornado a mile long or wide with winds over 200 miles an hour. Where does it come from, and how does it move along the ground? Just explain in layman's terms. Yeah.
What happens is you need a massive fight for a tornado to occur. Unlike a hurricane, which really is just trying to derive its energy, of course, is much larger and derives its energy from warm, moist sources. The tornado needs a clash between cold and warm, really, to get going. And we've had a very, very cold spring in the plains, so it shut the tornado season down completely. Now that warm, humid air is getting involved like it should, there's still enough cold air around to cause this type of clash. But what will happen is these cells that develop, there'll be a rapid inflow of warm, moist air into the cell. The cell will begin to rotate, and it's that feeding back, if you want to call it, where the energy starts focusing in one area, and as it does, it begins to spin and spin and spin, and it feeds back on itself, starts elevating itself up. You have the drier air over the top, and what happens is when moisture shoots into the drier air, it causes rapid cooling, because it's the same type of thing when you step out of a shower. You know how you're chilled?
Yeah.
It's because there's evaporation. So that increases the temperature gradient, which in turn increases the mechanism to produce the tornado. And then some things start coming along, local things. Like with this tornado, it got very, very bad when another cell, and you could see it as plain as the nose in my face, came in from the southwest, intersected with the developing tornadic system, and that extra energy came in, spun it up, and made it do what it did for a while. So, and the very fact that this was heading eastward over ground, the frictional effects try to tear these things down once they get very, very strong. And that's why you'll see these situations where they literally jump, because a lot of times the frictional effects will cause that feedback mechanism to be interrupted. It tries to reorganize again, and then it goes on its way. So you'll see that with tornadoes. Tornadoes are, I call them bullwhips from the sky. Hurricanes are more like bulldozers. You can get out of the way of a bulldozer if you choose to do so.
Right.
A lot of people decide they're not to, and you can't help that. But these things are very, very difficult. Once you see that right in front of you, it's very difficult to just get completely out of the way. That's why I was complimenting the National Weather Service so much, in that when you get a 20, 30-minute warning like that, and
Right.
these people are educated, they know
It's
what to do.
life and death. Yep.
That's right.
Life and death.
So
We're talking meteorologist Joe Bistardi, chief forecaster at Weather Bell, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Now, these folks there are not out of the woods, from what I'm hearing. The skies have been darkening there over Oklahoma.
No, Moore's not going to sit. No, they're in the cool air now.
Okay.
The temperature's 20 degrees below normal in Oklahoma City today. It's further south and east where the clash is occurring down in northeast Texas into Arkansas that is under the gun this afternoon, and then into the Ohio Valley during the day tomorrow, and then possibly to the East Coast after that. At Weather Bell, we've been talking about this for quite a while. In fact, last Sunday, our post was finally a tornado outbreak is coming, because this had all the classic setup. Look, these things, when you see a certain pattern, like this pattern from the upcoming hurricane season, favors a big hurricane season. You know why? Because if you've seen it before and it's similar, it's likely to happen again. So what happens is you look at the maps and you say, okay, I've seen that, and then you go back and examine those situations and say, bingo, I've seen that before, this is likely to happen. Not in the same spot, you can't really tell. But, with this situation in Moore, Oklahoma, last time, the 99 tornado, and I happen to know a guy that was in that tornado, that occurred during a cool May also, the 2008 season. A very cool May.
Well, wasn't this season pretty dormant for
Yeah,
tornadoes?
we were at record lows
Yeah.
because there was so much cold. Look, you need a fight. The reason why we had such a nasty season in 2011, it was brutally cold in the northern United States into Canada, got very warm in the southern part of the United States, so the fight zone actually stayed there. And if you think about it, it was further south than normal. It was into Alabama, and then it finally worked its way up later in the season, up into Missouri, of course, for Joplin, that type of situation. So you see that going on.
Let me just read you something real quick rather than play you. Barbara Boxer and most despicably Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island.
Unbelievable.
He went to the floor of the Senate while this was happening, while kids were being trapped in their schools and being killed. He went there and blamed Republicans and global warming. Barbara Boxer basically echoed it, but let me just read you something. From Newsweek, April 28, 1975. There are ominous signs that the Earth's weather patterns have begun to change dramatically, and that these changes may portend a drastic decline in food production with serious political implications for just about every nation. The drop in food output could begin quite soon, perhaps only 10 years from now. The region destined to feel the impact of the great wheat-producing lands of Canada, blah, blah, blah. The evidence in support of these predictions has now begun to accumulate so massively that meteorologists are, let me read it here, are hard-pressed to keep up with it. And then last April, in the most devastating outbreak of tornadoes ever recorded, 148 twisters killing more than 300 people and caused $500 million worth of damage in 13 states. And they point to that as evidence of the global cooling that's coming and is responsible for all this. That was back in 75.
Okay, well, what happens is this. Look, folks, the Pacific changed its cycle in the 1950s like it's doing now. There's what we call the warm Pacific Decadal Oscillation, cold. We were in a warm Pacific Decadal Oscillation in the 30s into the 40s. We switched it to 50s, 60s, and 70s. The Atlantic switched into its cold cycle in the 60s and 70s. We are currently in the 1950s part of that cycle. Heat and drought in the Central Plains, hurricanes on the East Coast, many tornadoes. You can look at the tornado graphs and see how many tornadoes there were going off, the big tornadoes in the 1950s. And that was even before we had all these detection methods we had now.
Right.
So what you were looking at is the tail end of that cold cycle. So what happened was that people were thinking then, well, this is going to continue, just like a lot of these people don't understand that with 1,000 times the heat capacity of the air, the oceans rule the climate, along with the sun, of course. The sun is the conductor of the orchestra. Then there's the ocean, what we call stochastic events like volcanoes. So what happens is these guys hooked the idea of the global increase in temperature up with the increase in CO2 and totally ignored the fact that it was a natural cyclical
But, Joe,
process.
they did it, and I think you'll agree, at least I believe they did it, to institute a carbon tax on all the world so they could make money, and it's a whole sham and a whole scam.
Let me just say this. I try to stay out of that, but yeah, you're right. But the situation with Senator Whitehouse, I was born in Rhode Island. My father's a meteorologist. I know the history of Rhode Island hurricanes like the back of my hand, 38, 44, 54, 1960, 76 with Bell, 85 with Gloria, 91 with Bob. This guy has been saying this stuff about hurricanes after Sandy. Now he's saying it about tornadoes. It seems to me that there is a new breed of climate fanatic that's developing. It's half parasite. It's a mutation, parasite and ambulance chaser. This is ridiculous. No, you know something? This is despicable. It's bad enough to say something like that, but when every single fact is against you, that global global tropical activity has been decreasing, for instance, that we are in a cycle that you can see as plain as the nose in my face, and you know what the problem is I believe these people deep down inside know what's going on, but are trying to make their point.
I am with you, Joe. I am with you. Listen, I thank you, sir, as always. Thank you very much. Joe Bistardi, meteorologist, chief forecaster at Weather Bell.